Good morning, everyone. It would be great if everyone can settle down. I've been told I need to start, or else we'll be late, and I think we should try and break for lunch on time. So let me start with a quick introduction. I won't go into the details with respect to the profiles and everything because you already have those details. But a quick introduction. I have with me our very esteemed, very experienced panelist. And on my right is Mr. Anil Sinha, who is the former director of CBI. Then we have Mr. Nitesh Sinha, who is the Senior Corporate Counsel, One India Governance, Compliance and Litigation, Microsoft. Then we have Dr. Vivek Mittal, Global General Counsel, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. And then we have Ms. Pia Haldar, who is the Chief Compliance Officer, India, Honeywell. And finally, we have Ms. Rupa Devi Singh, who is a very senior independent director with endless expertise, and she's going to be adding a lot of value to our panel today. And I'm Rupinder Malik. I'm a partner in law firm JSA. JSA is a pan-India law firm and a full-service law firm. I've been involved in, investigations related to fraud, cybersecurity, and various other aspects with respect to white-collar crimes for a very long time, and have come across various situations. So maybe as we go along and we discuss about our topic today, so we'll add some bits from my side. So I would say in the current global disruptions and the uncertain economic situations, the topic that we are discussing today is pretty critical. It is very important to assess the internal controls and the governance at the helm of a ship which is preparing for choppy waters, is what I would say. There is a lot to be looked at from that perspective. Now, fraud risk management, simply put, is a process, right, to assess all the risks in an organization, whether they are inherent, they are potential, they are internal, they are external, to devise an anti-fraud program which can ensure that there is enough systems in place to prevent and stop fraud before it happens. So that's simply put fraud risk management. All the organizations are exposed to fraud one way or the other at some time or the other, and irrespective of the size of an organization. So fraud, of course, is a very, I would say, essential, critical issue for all organizations. We've seen how many companies in the recent times have come within the radar of the ED. We are all aware of that. This morning, Tarun from Kroll also gave some interesting statistics. Mr. Mohanty talked about a lot of things which obviously would have surprised some people who are not regularly involved in investigations or are aware of some of these issues. So fraud is, of course, something which is critical. Now, in my view, fraud risk management has to be effective, has to be prompt, and intuitive. That's how I would say it. So what in our topic today, in our agenda today, we are covering 4 key topics. We are covering what are the key risk factors, identification of the risk factors. We are covering what's the role of the board and accountability. What about the role of the independent directors, the audit committee, and what about the young firms who are looking at a very fast growth? At the same time, they have to ensure compliance. And in fact, that was also something which was mentioned this morning. So with that, I will start. My first question would be to Pia. I'm actually trying to see who's sitting where. Okay. So Pia, for you, the question is, thank you so much. We'll call you. Thank you. Pia, what are the typical factors and circumstances in an organization that makes the working environment vulnerable? And again, with your experience, just try and give us some practical input as well so that the audience is fully involved in our discussion today. Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Rupinder. Am I audible? Audible? Okay, thanks. Okay, so Rupinder, I would typically, from the type of organization that we come in from, I would classify it, and we call it the fraud triangle. It's a common terminology that is used. So there are three elements to that, and the first one would be opportunity, and I'm going to kind of just pick on these a little bit. The first one would be opportunity, the second one would be incentivization, and the third one would be rationalization. Now, when I talk about opportunity typically falls under, why does an organization, fall vulnerable to fraud? Typically, the opportunity piece would be where you have weak controls. You do not have a good tone at the top. So to what someone mentioned earlier, that if it starts right at the top, at the promoter level or the chairman level, then there is no tone at the top which is happening. And the third element under the opportunity is what I call as not well-defined processes and procedures in an organization. So if it's haphazard, if you don't have defined policies and procedures, then it's always going to be vulnerable for fraud. So that's the first bucket. The second piece is what I call pressure and incentivization, typically. And that usually gets triggered by sales bonuses, pressure to deliver numbers, pressure to, meet analysts' expectations. So that's the second bucket, which we call as, you can call it pressure, you can call it incentivization, you can call it whatever. The third piece is more the ethics piece and is more person-driven. And those are typically issues where we've seen employees come and say that, I was asked to do it, or someone else is doing it, or, or the employee may have an issue around the organization. The organization may not have treated the employee well. So those are the other elements where, people are then prone or they want to commit a fraud and kind of, harm the company, as I may put it. And all of them kind of interplay. So nothing can be looked at in isolation. So they all interplay somewhere. So from a controls aspect, we have to take care of all these elements. If I have good policies, processes, controls, but I don't have the other two elements worked around or there's no oversight on that, it is bound to happen. So it has to be holistic.
Right, so I would just summarize three items that you've mentioned: the tone at the top, the pressure to deliver the numbers, right, and lack of oversight. I would think that's one of the things. And also, I would like to add, not enough oversight on touch points, which may fall within lack of oversight, but I think it's very important to assess the touch points in an organization to be able to assess what are the circumstances, situations, and areas which makes an organization vulnerable to fraud. So with that, I'll go to Nitesh. Nitesh, how do you think can a company continue to achieve growth without compromising on the compliance standards?
Okay.
And really, how does it differ for startups and large enterprises? Because on one hand, the large enterprises already have systems in place and which have been functional with large teams and existing for a large time. But startups, of course, are, they have the pressure to keep the cost under control and at the same time ensure compliance and growth and everything. In fact, this morning it was mentioned that startups have a strong risk to fraud given the situation. But what's your take on it?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Rupinder. And hello, everyone. I'll probably start with a few broad principles for a strong compliance program, and it's irrespective of the size of organization we are talking about, be it a large conglomerate or a startup company. So from my perspective, what I have seen over a period of time are like 4 elements which is essential for a strong compliance program, and I would say it starts with clearly defined value and culture. And since I come from Microsoft, we always say Microsoft runs on trust. So that's the value we aspire at our organization, and that's where we need to have a very clearly defined value and culture, which would be a foundation or the key principle to build a robust compliance program. The second element is obviously, which Pia touched upon, is a strong tone at the top, because, it is always a top to bottom approach when it comes to compliance. We need to ensure that our leaders are leading by example, creating that right tone at the top, so that employees feel safe whenever they see any concerns, any issue, they are able to raise it without any fear of retribution. The third element is around speak-up culture. In any organization, it is important, and someone in the preliminary session talks about whistleblower policy and how it is not very effective within India right now. So as an organization, if we are a compliance professional or we are a legal professional, we definitely need to work with our management to put in place a very strong speak-up culture. That's one of the primary requirements, I would say, for a robust compliance program. And the last one, obviously, is to build that support system around it. Because tomorrow there could be a scenario that people want to raise concern, they really don't know whom and how to reach out. So building a robust support system is equally important while we have all those 3 elements in place. And this is, again, irrespective of size and nature of the organization. The second element I would want to add around compliance program is to build a strong listening system in place, both external and internal. Because, we talked about pandemic, we talked about war, which we see Russia versus and Ukraine war, and now talks about recession. All these external factors bring in a lot of risk elements, and that's where we as compliance or a legal professional need to be proactive in listening to these signals and providing management right guidance. So with some of these broad principles in mind, Rupinder, I would say that from a large organization perspective, we need to, so if I can take an example of my organization, it is into multiple business group. For example, there's a sales group, there's a research and development group, and then there's a global delivery desk. Each and every organization is unique in itself from a risk landscape perspective. So we need to understand that and obviously build our risk profile or a risk program, keeping that unique structure in mind. That's one. And second, it is important to engage early with our stakeholders. So what we have seen, and this has been my experience, that if we are not engaging with our business stakeholders on time, it becomes a legal and compliance problem and not an organization's problem. So it is important to make sure that we are engaging early if we see the risk, and then obviously take necessary action. So these are some of the points, Rupinder, I would want to add to your question.
That's very helpful. That's great. And I completely agree with that. And large companies, of course, needs to ensure that there are no blind spots, even though they have all systems in place. And that's where things go wrong.
I missed out the startup. Whatever I said applies equally to startups, and more so because the way you grow, obviously we have to make sure that the strong governance mechanism is in place while you build your revenue and business.
So in my experience, I think the small companies, the startups typically believe that there cannot be any such risk because we are new, we are young, and these things typically happen in large organizations, and we are just a few of us. So I think that is also a little bit of confusion. But moving on, so thank you so much. So moving on to you, Rupa, how does fraud risk management work in a highly regulated sector in your view, given that you have experience of being an independent director on highly regulated sectors, companies which are in highly regulated energy, banking. So from that perspective, and what are the things that you think a board needs to take into account and be accountable towards? What's your general view to start with? I think it should be on. You can take this.
Yeah. Thanks, Rupinder. See, regulated sectors, and like Rupinder mentioned, I've been both in power sector as well as banking and also merchant banking. All the three spaces were very heavily regulated. And it was very nice that we had, in the first session, we had somebody like Mr. Mohanty, where you could see the concern and the anguish and anxiety of a regulator, being laid in front of you right away. We have with us, people like Mrs. Sinha who handled the other side of the spectrum, right? That they handle the consequence of regulatory breaches or failures in the system. And so, my key learning is that often when we look at, we quote things like Nirav Modi, and Nirav Modi becomes almost like a tag on the forehead of every banker, because there were memes going around on WhatsApp and everything. It makes you believe as if there's no system in place to control all these things happening, right? So what I would like to say is that compared to non-regulated sectors, regulated sector companies work under a very well thought out and very meticulously administered risk management mechanism, which is put into place by a regulator. So let's take banking, for example. You have the Banking Regulation Act, then you have a whole, RBI takes out hundreds of regulations a year. There is not a single aspect of banking operations which is not regulated. And so risk is, and this is done with a dual purpose. There is the regulators trying to manage the systemic risk, because these are activities which are part of the financial sector infrastructure of the country, and they're very important. And like Mr. Mohanty mentioned, a very important point, that a financial breach can be filled up, right? But the breach of confidence is something that takes a very, very long time to repair. And when that happens in the financial sector, for example, and also even capital markets for that matter, it takes one major capital market scam, like the Harshad Mehta scam. It took 5 years to build confidence in the stock markets and the ability of corporates to raise money. So I was sitting with SBI at that time, and I used to handle the credit committee from chairman's office, and we were finding that a lot of our companies were stuck in the growth phase. So, and they could not raise the capital because the stock markets were not supportive. So the regulators are very focused on doing that. And I'll give you also specific examples from banks. In banks, the regulator even comes down to the governance structure, this board structure, the board functioning down to committees to handle various things. So we have prescriptions on how many committees we'll have, who will sit on these committees. There is a very meticulous monitoring of the skill sets available on not only on the whole board, but also on each committee. And we have to update it every time there is a change on the board. Each committee has a very detailed terms of reference in what they should focus on. And almost every aspect that goes through a committee to the board is also reported to the regulator. So it's, regulation and operations in regulated entities are very, very intertwined. And so to that extent, while a director's role becomes a little more, I would say, strenuous, because there's so many regulations, there's so much of fine print to adhere to and make sure is adhered to. At the same time, I have a template to work with, and its life is that much more easier, right? And other than anything else you would like me to add, and I think the rest of the thing we can take later.
Sure. So I think Thank you. So I think even though there is high scrutiny in banking sector, we've seen endless fraud issues as well. So it's just amazing how sensitive and how critical this particular sector is, and a few other regulated sectors. So with that, we'll go over to you, Vivek. Now, Vivek, you see, compliance efforts across jurisdictions. Now that takes you beyond India, and there are various regulations which are applicable in other jurisdictions as well. Somewhere maybe stricter than what we have in India, and somewhere maybe not as strict. But really, I mean, where is your input and where is your insight on this in terms of the fraud risk management? How do you deal with it across jurisdictions? And can you bring out a few things which you think differs here in India, or some lessons that we've learned from other jurisdictions?
Thanks, Rupinder. Pleasure to be here. Just to give you a landscape in which we work with, we are a $3 billion organization, but we operate in about 35 countries onshore. Our largest business comes out of US. We are listed in US. We operate in almost all jurisdictions, as I say, let's say Russia, CIS, Africa, Europe, US. Being listed in India and being listed in US actually gives us a lot of challenges because we have to comply a lot. Our compliance standards are maybe equal or better than most of the US companies. We run a very broad-based compliance program which covers everything starting ethics, compliance, data privacy, trade compliance. So few things which I want to share with that landscape is that what is learning from other territories. So let's say I was discussing with Rupinder. Trade compliance could be one of the frauds, right? And what is trade compliance is? US putting sanction on some country. Let's say very recent example, Russia. Now, you manage the risk, and you are covered under sanctions or you are not covered under sanctions. But if you are covered under sanctions, still you try to circumvent it by routing your goods through other territories, right? That's a fraud. And those are the things which we bring to India. So what I want to say is, first of all, any compliance program globally starts with intent. You can frame as many regulations as you want to. I don't think you'll be able to, control fraud just by regulations. It starts with intent. So you have to build a culture of intent rather than regulations. That's how we firmly believe. And that's where we have to start, Rupinder, just to sort of tell you that we have to start with the building intent that we need to build our image very clean. That's one. Other thing which I want to point out is that we talked about tone at the top and tone from the top. Very, very important is what is tone at the middle, because those are the guys who are in front line. So what we learned over the period of time is, while we all talk about tone at the top and tone from the top, but what is tone at the middle? Other learning which I can share very clearly is, we talk about governance at the board level. What is governance at middle level? Right? Are we teaching them governance? Are we teaching them transparency? Are we teaching them adequate disclosures? It's not the obligation of board. It's not the obligation of senior management. It's obligation of each individual, each manager of the company. And whenever you use the term manager, that means this person is managing more than 2 people or more than 3 people. So what I want to say is that there are many learnings. It's very difficult to operate in multi-jurisdiction. What we keep doing is that I was talking to my team day before. Just to give you an example, this Anti-Slavery Act of UK, which is applicable for UK companies, and pace is growing a lot in European countries. So we pick up those pockets and we see where they are growing, and we try to implement them across our company. So that's what we do. We use cross knowledge and we try to build our policies around it. So that's one thing we do, including in our contracts. Other thing what we do is that we try to standardize our compliance program globally. I have seen companies which have policies, territory-specific policies. What we don't do is we do have territory-specific policies, but they are only more stringent rather than more liberal. So that's what we do. Other thing which we keep doing is we keep scanning the market, that where the market is going, where are the new risks. So I have two kinds of team working in ethics and compliance. One is purely managing current risk, and we have also a COE team which we have created, which is Center of Excellence, who would do research globally that where other laws or other countries' laws are growing, what kind of fines and penalties are being imposed in other territories, including US, which is very, very advanced. If there are pockets which we are not complying, and if there are pockets which we have to comply in next 3 years, what are the preparedness? Are our policies covering that? So we keep doing that. So it's not easy. I can tell you that, it's not easy to comply these days. It's not easy to find frauds. It's not easy to manage that large company. However, what we keep telling in our company is that compliance is everyone's responsibility. It's not our legal or compliance functions responsibility. What we have done is we have created 3 line of defense model, where we train our frontline people that you are the people who are our compliance ambassadors. You will have to comply. If you have a problem, you fall back to the second line. If you have a problem, then that line has a problem, then you fall back to the third line. And then what we do is we do continuous monitoring. We do email forensics. We do voucher checking. And that all has come from various kind of experiences which we have done in different jurisdictions. So what I can share is that, yes, compliance starts with intent. It's everyone's responsibility, and you have to pick up from your experiences in other territories. I think India has long way to go from where we are as of today in covering all kind of compliances. We only talk about ethics and statutory compliance in India. I think it's much, much broader globally.
Thank you so much. I think, Vivek, very valid points. Intent, I completely agree, is relevant. Tone at the middle, I would say not just middle, tone at the entire organization in terms of how it gets communicated right to the bottom, to the person who's actually going and meeting the regulators, to the person who's out there on your behalf. I've done investigations where the leadership team is very much aligned, is fully aware of everything, knows what's right, what's wrong. But unfortunately, it was never noticed that people within the organization didn't believe in the same language or the same tone, or they did not believe in those same ethics that the leadership team had. So I would say, yeah, those are very important things. And culture, even from a state to state, I would say is a very important element, how you communicate. If there is somebody down south, if you're doing a training, make sure get someone who can speak the right language and explain to every person on the ground. Not all organizations are built in the same manner. And the last but not the least, the Anti-Slavery Act, I think we have a long way to go, but if that ever comes to India, then I really don't know what's going to happen. So with that...
Sorry, before that,
yeah.
just one comment on cultural aspect. Very recently, a unique thing which we have done. I have about 7 to 8 regional compliance officers. Let's say one manages India, one manages Africa. So what we did was that we did roundtables in those territories, in those countries, but we sent cross. So let's say India, person doing roundtables in CIS countries, a person in Latin America coming to India doing roundtables here, try and understand. So we bridge that cultural gap in that sense. to try and see what's their perspective versus compliance in India versus compliance in US versus compliance in Europe. So good exposure that way.
Good learning too. Excellent.
Rupinder, just, I think one very relevant point which Vivek made, and I think most organizations cut corners on that, is that for everything that we read here, right, the governance, the fraud, the compliance, I think any organization needs to be adequately resourced. I think a lot of organizations cut corners when it comes to these critical functions, because at the end of the day, they're just functions. They don't generate revenue. So I think that is the mindset change that people need to drive, that do invest in these resources. They're critical, whether they're fraud experts, audit teams, or compliance resources. So I just kind of wanted to add that in.
Correct. Completely agree with that. Resources are very, very important, and effective resources. That's more critical. And with that, we'll come to you, Mr. Sinha. I know before I ask you a question, you wanted to say a few things to the audience, so over to you.
Sure. Can I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Rupinder. And ladies and gentlemen, I see the mood quite somber here. It's been 30 years since the Cadbury report, and 20 years almost since the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and various committee reports like Kumar Bangam, Birla report, Narayan Murthy report, Naresh committee's report, which talked about the compliances and directorships, non-executive directorships, independent directors, and various other things. And we are still here talking about corporate governance. We are here talking about risk management. We are talking about frauds. Why is it so? Is it because everything is bad, or is it because what Mr. Banerjee had said a while ago, that red signals and policemen and all that? No. I look at it differently. I look at it like the way the generation before us were told that take care of your health. We were told, and we are still being told, that take care of your health. And you, young ladies and gentlemen, you know more than anyone else the importance of maintaining good health. So the basic idea is not to police. The basic idea is to keep it in good health. To keep your sector free from biases, free from the viruses that may get into the system, free from the bacteria that may invade you. They're pretty much there on the threshold. You can see them. But are you equipped to keep them at bay? That's the central question. I have confidence, let me tell you, while we were discussing, and speaker after speaker looked at me and as if I was still that feral wolf which I was once addressed as. No, we were on the other side, but that was not the other side. When I took over, at that point of time, the media said that the industry was afraid of 3 C's: the CBI, the CVC, and the CAG. And it so happened that during a meeting with the bankers, which happened pretty much here, I told them that, look, our job is not to harass you. Our job is not to cause impediments, but our job is to caution you and to correct you. So if you're looking at 3 C's, then please look at the other 2 C's, caution and correction. So when we are talking about the corporate governance here today, it's not about anything else. It's not to intimidate you. So contrary to what was the theme right in the morning, which was transpiring that the negativity is flowing, I don't see any negativity here. I see that you guys intent, and you have this thinking on the right tracks, that is, you're thinking about caution, you're thinking about correction. The only question that is, and it should be in your mind, is how do you go about it? How do you think of your health? How do you put the safeguards in place? Everyone is talking about various things. We particularly have a habit of saying a whole lot of things which may mean nothing more than jargons. I'll stay clear of that. I'll tell you what it actually should mean to you. When you look at somebody having an accelerated growth trajectory, that is when your antennae should be up. To give you an example, borrowing from the health sector itself, you heard of Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, and that Pakistani Sindhi, Ramesh Sani Balwani, for whom it should, that line from Shah Rukh Khan's movie would aptly apply, Ek boond khoon ki कीमत tum kya jano Ramesh Babu. That gentleman, Elizabeth Holmes, when she started with Theranos, what did she start with? She said just with few drops of blood, just a drop of blood. She could carry on with the whole lot of diagnostic, and those diagnostic tools turned out to be what? Seeped into deception. The central theme which runs through all these frauds and risk management is what? That at the end, when you look at it, the centrality of only one thing is their deception. When we were investigating the coal blocks, when we were investigating 2G, when we were investigating the banking frauds, whatever it is, ultimately we found that everything boiled down to deception. And why did deception take place? Number one, there were no early warning signal system embedded into the system. Way back when I was in CVC, and around that time, I came across something which was circulated under the signature of a very famous banker who was member of the Central Vigilance Commission, Mrs. Ranjana Kumar. And she wrote about corporate governance, and what was it about? She felt that the software part of it was not adequately addressed. And what is the software part? That is the heart and soul which should be there into compliances, which should be there for ensuring the safeguards, was lacking. Now, when I talk about the accelerated growth trajectory, do you realize that when we have reached the status of the 5th largest economy in the world, we are also up against certain challenges. The challenges are relating, number one, data. Today only you have read, the data is required for development, and the Prime Minister of the country has said it to the rest of the world that it cannot be usurped and it cannot be appropriated only by few developed countries or the few nations who have the control mechanisms over the data. So it has to be shared for developmental purposes. But what is this data? This is true, the new oil, but at the same time it requires security, which should be embedded right with the principles of the compliances. Now, let's take, for example, whenever you are on any e-platform or whenever you are on a social media platform, suddenly you find the cookies coming up. And what are these cookies? They pretty much crumble our cookies, because the phishing mails, the spams, the cookies, when they come up to you, they kind of literally compel you, force you into accepting things which you ought not be accepting in the very first place. and your identity is compromised, it is subject to thefts. Now, this is where our antennae should be up. Again, what else? We are not looking only at these. We are looking at how to strengthen the system from within. We heard about the micro, we heard about the macro. I'm not talking about that ab initio intent was wrong, or this is bad, or that is incorrect. I said that I have confidence in all of you. You know why? Because yours is the generation which is the aspirational generation. You're not the doubting Thomases like us. You have hope and you have buoyancy. You have the right capacity to move forward and move forward pretty sure. How do you do? The idea is equip yourself well. And on this, I'll take it from what Ms. Halder said and what Mr. Mittal just said, is the proper allocation of resources into developing the capacity. I am a votary of capacity building. I believe in skill upgradation. There was a time when people used to say that whether CBI has the capability of investigating financial crimes. Let me tell you just for a second that during my time what we did is, with the help of Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, we worked out a module by which we were training our officers. Officers who had investigated Satyam scams, who had investigated securities scam, who had investigated pretty much most of gamut of the financial crimes. But still we made them undergo the newer trains. We made them train into the newer trains into the financial securities and products. Because products, when they are coming into the market, they carry with them certain inherent strengths and weaknesses. Those weaknesses can be exploited. Like I was talking to somebody yesterday, and what happened was I was told that a very famous payment gateway, when the stocks were listed, it was around 2100 and today it is 600. Now, what does it indicate? It indicates that it was overpriced. And why was it overpriced? Because we are buying on account of the herd mentality. In India, we still have the system where we are buying on account of the word of mouth publicity without doing our own due diligence at the individual level when we are investigating. And we ought to be investigating and when we are investing into that. So I go into investing into some stock. I don't carry out any investigation on my own. And what I do is, just because Nitesh has told me that, oh, this is a pretty good one, or Mittal tells me that this is a pretty good one, I go and blindly follow that. That's herd mentality. And then the prices jack up. Now, whom do you attribute this fraud to? To the herd mentality or the fraud, or what is it? So here is the caution. The caution is to this generation, the newer generation, that think of yourself as a regulator. Think that you're the CBI. Think that you're the CVC. Think that you're the CAG. Think that you're the compliance officer. Compliance has to be embedded into the entire architecture of the enterprise. It's not something which can be superimposed. Like, you know, the difference between iOS and Android is what? Android is retrofitted and iOS comes with all the fittings. So what I say is that try to embed it right into your culture without waiting for something to be retrofitted. Compliances cannot be retrofitted. Once it is retrofitted, then that means that the governance is for the sake of lip service only. It's not inherent. It has to be inherent into the system. Once it is, then even if you are asked to appear, you'd be saying that, yes, we have taken care of these. And on this, I'll take just one more minute to caution you about something which has happened in 2018. We had the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988, which has been going on, but it has been amended in 2018. And there are 3 sections of which are very important. 7 and 8 have been from before about the criminal misconduct and bribery and all that. You know about the UK Foreign Bribery Act and various other acts. You know, I'm not going to educate you in that. But I'm talking about Section 9 and 10 of the Prevention of Corruption Act. Section 9 now lays the onus squarely at the company's feet. Now, companies as entity are liable for prosecution, and under Section 10, people who are managing the affairs of the companies, they cannot take the excuse anymore that they were part of the company, but they were not the ones. They are liable. Whether the company is or the body is listed in India or abroad, whether it is a corporation or it is an associate or a partnership firm, whatever it is, it's been amply defined, explained under Section 9 and 10 of the Prevention of Corruption Act, amended in 2018, and under the Indian Penal Code, that age-old provision of 120B, that conspiracy-related section. Companies as body are liable, so it is imperative that the very structure of compliances should be embedded into the culture, because there is an exception in those clauses of the PC Act which said that provided, the proviso is provided the compliances are in place in the company. So your saving grace is, ladies and gentlemen, if God forbid you fall foul of law, is that whether the compliances are embedded into the culture. Having said that, one could go on and on and on and on about how to structure the whole thing, how to talk about it, how to implement it, but then I have my faith still intact in you that this is the generation which knows far better than me, far more than me. I've done my duty, I am ancient history, but you guys are there, you have to take it forward, you have to ensure that when the national growth trajectory is in question, when the international population is aspiring to grow and grow, then there are no impediments which are caused because of the lack of oversight. Oversight has to be there, and that oversight must and at best should come from within, not from without. That's what I wanted to caution. Thank you.
The session's not over yet. This was superb. This was our surprise element, a motivating, and enlightening session in the middle of a session. So it was superb. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Very, very meaningful, very, very useful, and I completely agree on a lot of counts. I do want to say that we are on the same side here right now. So you're not on the other side. So we are all on the same side. And the 3 C's, caution, corruption, and I added the third one, is a correction, and correction.
Caution and correction.
Right? And that's what I want to bring in. And one more element that I want to bring in is the Prevention of Corruption Act. Well, you rightly said that the onus is now shifted on the organizations, but we are waiting and waiting for the regulators to detail out what are those adequate procedures that the companies need to have. Now, I have endless clients of mine come to me, and of course, with years of experience, decades of experience, we can provide that information. But technically, the regulators are just sitting, the authorities, lawmakers are sitting on it, and we haven't heard yet. So hopefully, I'm hoping to hear what adequate procedures, the authorities want to ensure are in place, because that will give us more clarity to the organizations. What happens is when something is not laid out in black and white, a lot of times, people just assume that this is not necessary, even though the lawyers may have advised. So that's one point which I think is still pending.
Can I answer that?
Yes.
I'll tell you in relation to that is there's something called Integrity Pact. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
This is something which was introduced by Transparency International, and it has been adopted. And this is in place in most of the public sector enterprises and public sector banks, and in fact, almost all. And similarly with most of the ministries under the government of India and even the state governments. Now, anyone who is a vendor or a partner or any entity dealing with them has to get into that pact. And what is this Integrity Pact? This Integrity Pact is basically a whole set of compliances which have been embedded into an ethical conduct which is now mandatory. Once you get into the pact, it is not mandatory for you to get into the pact. But once you get into the pact, then these sets of compliances, the sets of the ethical do's and don'ts, they become mandatory for you to follow. Now, this Integrity Pact also requires independent external monitors. We heard about the independent directors and what kind of pressures the independent directors are facing and a whole lot of things. Independent external monitors are like independent directors, but they are not independent directors. They are part of the oversight. And right from the contract which is still under process till the finalization of the contract, they have the authority to look into every aspect of it. If they get the complaints, whether it is a whistleblower complaint or whether it is a signed complaint or it is an address complaint, they can get into that. And they can examine this and they can advise the company, they can advise the board. There's a requirement. There's a requirement that this kind of mechanism, if it has worked well, and it's still working very well for the public sector enterprise and public sector banks, so why would it not work for the private sector as well? Because in private sector, what happens is when we hear about the deception, all those three things or four things like fuzzing or inflated valuation, zombie foreign collaborations, like we saw in the coal scam cases. What had happened was some of the principals, they created subsidiaries, and those subsidiaries, they entered into foreign collaborations which were from various countries in Southeast Asia, and they had promised to invest, but the promises were not even inked in as much of detail, and that was a sham thing which was there. Now, had there been any emphasis on Integrity Pact, then there would have been disclosures. That disclosure was lacking. Similarly, in the banking fraud cases that people talked about, all those things, this Integrity Pact was not taken into account. There were no disclosures. This is something which is, to me, it appears, can be a primary stepping stone. And thereafter, it can be worked on. It is required of every company, every enterprise to work its own methodology. And second thing, which is most important, is the whole world is moving away from the system of paper. You're coming on the e-platform. And why is it? Because we want to cut down on the red tape. On the other hand, in the sector of the compliances, we find that there are still huge volumes and bundles where you have to tick boxes. Move away from that. Make it crisp. Make it shortened. You shorten it. Make it crisp and come to the rudimentaries, come to the basic core functions and cut out on the speed. Just because you have to get into the real-time data dissemination, that doesn't mean that you cut corners. But it also doesn't mean that you get bogged down under the huge load of
Correct.
data that you need to.
And I think, yeah, so I think that of course has to be tailored to your organization. It has to be crisp, it has to be relevant. I completely agree. Thank you so much for that. So going back to Pia, so what are the, the areas prone to, I mean, from your organization perspective, how do you identify and prioritize the areas prone to fraud to get the formula right, which is actually our topic today?
That's quite a difficult question. So I think, all of us have covered bits and pieces of it. I think any organization needs to have a framework. So it is mandatory that every organization sets up, a risk assessment framework. Now, whether you do a fraud risk assessment or you do an ABAG risk assessment or you do some other risk assessment, but nevertheless, there has to be a risk assessment framework which is set up. That's the first thing that I would say. The second thing that I would say, and I said this earlier, is that I think it's imperative that organizations start strengthening second line and third line of defense. Either whether it's resourcing or capabilities. I think it's very important that the second line and the third line, who are basically, the policemen and not the red light, but whatever you may want to call it. But typically,
I would call them doctors.
Doctors, okay. So the doctors and the policemen. We need to have the force in any organization, to kind of ensure that you have an effective compliance program. The third thing and the last thing that I think is extremely critical, and I think most organizations are moving towards is, and I think Vivek covered that a little bit, is the monitoring piece. But I would look at it a little differently. I would say that it's data analytics. So your early warning system should come in from the data analytics that the organizations are running. So what would that mean for an organization is that you have monitoring capabilities, you have alerts which are in the system, so you're doing it in a small scale to understand if there is any fraud, or any kind of inappropriate things which is getting generated in the system. I think Indian companies or even companies which are based in India, I think we're not really there as far as the data analytics piece goes, but at least all the companies that I speak with, everyone has or is moving towards, that they've taken that step already. Even from our organization perspective, we are working on trying to create pools of data, trying to have automatic monitoring systems. So for example, just a very, very simple example. Most companies have, we call it the gifts and hospitality or gifts and entertainment tools, right? Where an employee is supposed to put in a request or an ask for entertaining an official or giving a gift to, say, a government official or to any customer. What we need to do is not only have that as, say, just a request or an ask that the employee puts in for an approval, but go a step before, and start monitoring patterns on that. And that ties back to what I'm saying, that you need to have that data analytics capabilities in the system to be able to pick that up. So if you have an employee, I don't know what the cutoffs are. So say, for example, you have a $20 cutoff, but if you have an employee consistently putting $18 or $17 or whatever, $49 instead of a $50, those patterns is what the organizations need to, they should be able to trace that.
Thank you so much. And I think rightly said, but data analytics, I mean, as of today, we only go into it when we are in trouble. Not as a preemptive, but as a reactive reaction to issues. So moving on to you, Rupa, you've been independent director, and going back to the discussion on the role of board, what is your view? And what, in your view, the independent director, what role can an independent director play in effective role in governance, in preventing fraud and mismanagement? Any thoughts on that would be great. Thank you.
Right, so see, the way I look at it is, now been exposed to maybe 10 or 11 companies listed, public sector, private sector, across sectors, and over a 8 or 9 year period. See, if you're an independent director and you believe that all of us who are assembled in this room are on the side of governance, you really don't have much of an option but to stay clearly on that side. And you have to stay visibly on the side of governance. And is it easy to do so? And see, and I've been in promoter-led companies where the personality cult rules. What can an independent director do over there? It looks almost impossible to be able to do anything. But let me tell you that I think the first thing an independent director needs to do is do their own risk management and make sure that they do not associate with boards and promoters where they have reason to have concern. So half your battle is won over there. Because if you live in a house of fraud, there's that old Kabir Das doha, काजल की कोठरी में कैसो भी सयान हो जाए, एक लीक काजल की लागी ही लागी है. So you are bound to, when you get into a house of thieves, there is a thief in the house, no amount of locking and policing is going to help, right? So, but we do know that as a pure propensity and probability of events happening, even in the best led company, there is a scope for fraud, right? And I think we should focus more over there because if I'll again go back to the first statement that where there is a deliberate attempt to defraud, and you've been a cop, and I've lived most of my life with a cop, and the belief is that all kind of defense arrangements fail in the face of a suicide bomber. You cannot plan against a suicide bomber beyond a point, right? So that also goes for deliberate, calibrated attempt to deceit. Right? What you can do in a steady state company and what I do, as an independent director is be unequivocal and absolutely meticulous about compliance. Compliance is not just about making sure your regulatory filings are there or making sure that, there's small slippages you notice in the culture of an organization. You will see patterns of the tedious statement which needs to be uploaded on the 7th of every month is routinely put up on 10, 11. I feel internal audit, a strong internal audit function which runs a fine comb through the activities of the organization and the director spending time on that internal audit report to pick up the signals is very, very important because it tells you about the underlying culture. That's one part. The other is focus on you cannot run the company. It's not your job to run the company. It's also your duty to distance yourself from the operation so that you don't get passionate about anything and you do not lose your perspective. So make sure you put into place a very strong policy framework and watch very carefully on deviation from policy. And I say this also because, when you're associated with the bank, we have n number of policies governing credit. But what use are those policies if 8 out of 10 of your proposals deviate from that? Right? So, the deviations. So, what I think Priya was also talking about, data analytics is great, but not everything can be quantified. But these are data which is available to you all the time. Do your quarterly reports come in time? Is your board agenda uploaded in time? I work across companies. There are companies where no amount of pushing will not get them to adhere to a simple company law regulation that 7 days notice has to be given. 7 days earlier, the board agenda has to be uploaded, right? So all these things create a culture of looseness, and you don't lose the world in a day. It happens, little by little, inch by inch, and gradually that culture kind of erodes the I think the foundations on which accuracy and, no, I think I would put accuracy separately because that's another facet, that erodes the fundamentals of governance and there is a chance for fraud to happen. And one such, another last parameter I would say which I watch out for is the culture of accuracy. A culture of accuracy speaks a lot about the culture of honesty and integrity. I think I was talking to Ekta earlier and she's talking, In fact, I'd love to catch up with her over lunch and understand how the function of business integrity is conceptualized and what do they focus on. But I think it's a very attractive term to me. I think accuracy and business integrity are, two facets of, I would say, very, very strong pillars of risk management. And we often, take a very, very easy attitude towards them.
Excellent. I agree with that, and I think the independent perspective, it's not just a statement or a word. It actually has to be, followed through as an independent director, and it's not easy. It's a tough one to keep yourself distant at the same time involved on the board. So. Thank you for your thoughts. Okay, moving on quickly to Nitesh. Nitesh, very quickly, your thoughts on cybercrime related issues and risks, because that is something in the today's world, in current world, we cannot run away from, given the trend and the number of cyber cases related incidents that are happening literally on a minute-to-minute basis, I would say.
Yeah, and I'll keep it quick because I know it's kind of becoming a monologue and would love to hear from the audience as well. Cybersecurity as a topic has gained significance like never before. And if you look at the latest Kroll survey report, 90% of organizations in the last 12 months have faced some sort of a cyber incidents in the last 12 months. So it is here in India as well. We obviously don't see state actors right now, but yeah, at some point of time, we would start seeing the issues which we have heard about Russia attacking Ukraine before the actual war started. So those kind of scenarios are real, active, and it is going to impact India as well, so we need to be prepared about it. In terms of what we should be doing as an organization, I would suggest, there are a lot of work already started happening primarily around building security assessment. So if your organization has not really gone into doing a security assessment yet, I would encourage that you go and talk to your management about really doing a security assessment in terms of how we are doing. That's one. Secondly, the way we have compliance programs in place, we should be having a security program and guidance documents for our employees and for the ecosystem. That's very important, and obviously creating awareness around it. CERTIN, which is the regulatory body, they have come up with a lot of guidance around it. We are struggling to really understand in terms of how we effectively comply with it. But please do have, you need to appoint resources, nodal officers, center of excellence to really understand some of these guidances and start applying it in your organization, because this is going to be quite real in next few years to 10 years probably from an India perspective. That's all I would add.
Thank you so much. I think in the interest of time, I won't go into the details of the whistleblower that I wanted to talk about, because that's another topic on its own, and I think we could spend literally all day talking about it. But Vivek, I don't want to hear your thoughts on risk management in general as a concluding, thoughts, given that we've all brought in some or the other interesting perspective to our discussion today. But is there anything that you would like to add? And then we'll go to Mr. Sinha and then to the audience.
Sure. So very quickly, what I keep telling my team and the entire company whenever we talk is that identify the red flag. That identification of red flag has to be done individually. Whatever programs you put in place may not identify all red flags. So identification, individual identification of red flag and connected with whistleblowing sometimes is the key. Other thing, food for thought for today, we all talked about financial frauds, right? In company, whatever structuring we talked about, bank frauds, whatever kind of fraud we heard, as of today, since I'm hearing this, is a financial fraud. Have you thought about product frauds? Very classic example, Johnson & Johnson powder, baby powder, product fraud. And why I would say product fraud is because when the discovery process was happening, a lot of people realized that there were ample emails within the system which raised a red flag in relation to the product. But companies were not able to, that J&J was not able to pick up and identify the product-related fraud which was going in the organization. Now, we need to see those product frauds now. I think what we are also trying to do in our organization is, are those product frauds prevailing in the organization? Are we developing or reverse engineering or launching a product in a market which could be detrimental to the public at large? In addition to financial frauds, we need to be aware of those frauds, and we need to address it some way. Very, very important. Last point from my side, risk management is everyone's responsibility. I keep telling in my company, we are just in one sense police, right? But law is applicable to each one of you as is applicable on us. So a policy of a company in relation to hospitality, either, ABAC or maybe marketing codes or whatever, is applicable on each one of you. You are the custodian, we are just a police. We will try to identify if you are complying with it, but ultimately it's your responsibility. So risk management starts with everyone, with the frontline people. We just have to monitor it in one sense.
Absolutely, loud and clear. It is the responsibility of everyone in the organization, and that's what needs to be communicated, I guess. So with that, I do have a question for Mr. Sinha, and at the same time, I'm going to open the floor for the audience to come up with their questions. And what I wanted to know from you, Mr. Sinha, is what is the enforcement environment in your view in the changing times? What does it look like to you? How do you think, and of course there will be very much challenges, many challenges as well, which will come across for the enforcement agencies. But in general, what do you see the enforcement environment to be in these coming times? And I would also open up the floor thereafter so that we can wrap up in time.
To give you a very quick update on that, I personally see that our endeavor is to fight corruption and crime. And every enforcement agency within the country, whether it is the CBI or the Enforcement Directorate or the SFIO, wherever you go, they see that things are changing for better, but still, there is so much that has been brushed under the carpet which needs to be brought out, and action needs to be initiated against that. Having said that, let me tell you that this is not to act as a deterrence in doing good work, because this is going to create a culture where people will work with caution, will work with right frame of mind. I'll, at this point in time, take just 1 second to carry on from where Mr. Mittal has said that financial crimes, it's not only financial, the frauds, I agree with him partly, but then whether it is IP related, or it is IT related, or product related, or whatever it is, at the end of the day, everything gets monetized. Everything is monetized. So ultimately, it all boils down to financial only. And whose finances are this? Whose money is this? This is your money. You investing into the market. It's a stakeholder's money, it is shareholders' money. When somebody is appropriating $55 billion and the people are being retrenched with not as much as by decency of thank you very much. And when the mantra is fake it till you make it, then God help the environs. Whether it is investment into the climate or investment into the finances, it is ultimately everything which is monetized, which boils down to your money, and the enforcement agencies have a job to protect your money, and that is the mood, and that is the mantra.
Perfect. Yes, yeah, I agree. It boils down to the financial fraud at the end of the day. All right, with that, we'll open the floor to the audience. Anybody has a question? Yes, right at the back.
Hi, I'm Lakshmikant Gupta. I have a question to Pia. In fact, you were saying something about the early warning signal or identifying the fraud areas, considering the data analytics based on the vouchers request or the gift requests, etc. That is more, of course, on the sales promotion side. However, what about the procurement side where the vendors do directly gift to the purchase department, maybe at their home or in these situations or maybe in cash? So how can it be tackled?
That comes from the culture of the organization. I think, as rightly said right from the beginning, that it has to be embedded. And I think say no should be the tagline or the motto. But that's on a lighter note. But I'm guessing it has to come in from the culture where people have to be, made clear that you cannot accept, or if you are accepting, disclose, declare. To the specific question, of course, can you track people in the procurement team who are getting gifts? Is there a way of doing data analytics? No, I don't think so. We still don't have it here as of now. But in terms of just procurement and data analytics, there's a lot of stuff which is available, and one can actually work around that in terms of, catching duplicate POs, invoices. So the other aspects of the procurement piece, the sourcing piece, there is a lot of data analytics which can be done, and alerts which can be put into the systems. But when it comes back to intent, going back to what Vivek said, I think whether someone's accepting something which he or she is not supposed to accept is, I guess that should come from the fact that it's what the culture of the organization is. So from my perspective, I think the culture and what you communicate has to be loud and clear. If something is not okay, then it is not okay for me, not okay for someone 5 rungs down the line or 5 rungs above. I think that should be what you take away.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think sometimes companies even miss out in having appropriate policies in place to begin with. So some companies do miss out on actually writing down some of these basic requirements or necessities in terms of how to handle gifts, just as an example. When gifts come, if somebody's dropped a gift, a procurement person has received a gift from somebody, what do you do with that next? There are companies who don't even have detailed policies on that. So one is the policy, then culture comes as, of course, as an effective communication. Yeah. So yeah, I completely agree.
Sorry, Rupal, one more point.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest fraud within corporate is conflict of interest, if we realize. What gift is doing is creating a conflict. How are we addressing conflict of interest is one of the interesting things which we all should think about. That's one of the biggest fraud in my view.
One more question to Vivek Mittal. Yeah. In fact, like last 2-3 years, we all have seen that there were a lot of race and research to get the vaccinations for COVID, including Sputnik as well. So during those arena, now, were there cases relating to briberies to health organizations or concerned authorities to get the vaccine approved or something like that?
So difficult to answer. So unfortunately, I was not. I'm not privy to what authorities were doing and what other company was doing. I can talk about only my company that.
No. My question is not on Sputnik in general.
I'm generally also saying that I don't think that we keep a market track that if companies are giving any bribe or regulators are accepting or not. So no data with me. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes. Yes, you can, and then maybe there's another person at the back. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. I'm Siddhant Mishra from the Financial Express. So my question pertains to cyber security and compliance in general. Now, in the recent, 1.5 years, we have had a major private bank that was barred from issuing credit cards because of constant glitches in that, tech systems. one of the two major payment merchants was also barred from India for over a year because they refused to comply with the data storage norms. Now, despite so much, impact on business, especially when the big companies are suffering, so what, according to you, I think Mr. Sinha or Mr. Mittal can answer this. So, what, according to you, is preventing these companies from complying with these norms at a faster pace? Is it like lack of intent, lack of expertise, or the cost issue? Like, why are they not doing it? And what do you think should these companies do to ramp up compliance with these norms?
Yeah, maybe I'll start, and this is not a difficult, this is not an easy answer, by the way. One, obviously, we are playing catch-up when it comes to cybersecurity compliance. Second, if you look at from a bank perspective, this entire cybersecurity regulation has been there in place for quite some time. To your point, yes, the intent is missing, and largely for a reason that the enforcement, A, was not that effective, and secondly, people did not really see too much of loss happening, but things are now changing rapidly. So going forward, we would definitely see a lot of advancement, development in this space, which did not happen because A, for the intent part, second, enforcement part, and third, the loss, from a loss perspective, it wasn't that significant. So that's how I'm hopeful that things would change over a period of time. But yes, I agree with your observation. Unless you would like.
Yeah, no. So very quickly, I can't speak on behalf of those companies, but I can say from global perspective. So just to give an example, specifically pick up data privacy as an issue, right? We were doing an analysis and we realized that about 50 odd data privacy laws apply on us. Now, globally, right? Now we have to frame a policy. Can we frame policy, keeping in mind all those 50 data privacy laws? Answer is no. Then also keep a track that what is changing in those countries? Answer is no. So what we did was we did a baseline and we said baseline is GDPR and we'll comply with GDPR mostly in all countries. Now because of that baseline, if we are not complying a data privacy law in any country, would you say it's a missing of intent, or would you say it's because it's very, very inconvenient for large companies to comply with each and every country's law? I think answer lies somewhere in between. In my view, I don't think intent would be missing with large companies. I think it's a matter of inconvenience of complying each and every local law. Could be the answer. I don't know, but I just gave you a perspective, right?
Yeah, very quick follow-up question on the data privacy part. How easy or how feasible do you think something on the lines of the EU data privacy law is possible in a country like India?
This is a tough one because we just had a data, and probably Rupinder would know, we had the bill and that bill has again gone back with 80 plus observations. So in Indian context, apart from law, it's all about our understanding in terms of how important and relevant it is for us from a data compliance perspective. So that's obviously this entire cultural shift needs to happen. Yeah. While we need to have an overarching data protection law, which is still not in place. So yeah, we are few probably years to go before we reach to that GDPR level.
And I think the biggest concern for the organizations at the moment is the certain guidelines where you have to report a cyber incident within 6 hours of knowing it. So I think that's under the data privacy, that's the biggest challenge for the companies at the moment. Thank you so much. I'll just take the last question right at the back. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name is Kushangi Sivani and I'm from Larsen & Toubro. It has been a very lively and informative discussion. My question specifically is to Mr. Nitesh and Mr. Mittal. So, as working with organizations which have multi-jurisdictional presence, I wanted to know what may be the differences in the standards of compliance with jurisdictions like US and UK, where you have the FCPA and the UK Bribery Act versus the anti-corruption and anti-bribery regime in India. So what may be the differences in the compliances? And if there are, then do you follow a jurisdiction-wise same level of compliance and the standards that are there under, let's say, the US FCPA and the UK Bribery Act, or do you have separate levels and standards of compliances in separate jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think I already answered it earlier
Yeah,
in
but that
relation to
was
data
very-
privacy, but I'll answer you in relation to ABAC and ethics. So what companies like us, and we have done a benchmarking globally very, very recently, what we had done is, and what companies like us would do is, they will create a certain benchmark within the company, and we will say that this is our policy, which will probably cover FCPA or UK anti-bribery or maybe European laws. And then we will say that these are the benchmarks which within our company, while you can be more strict, but you cannot be liberal. And then we left it to each and every country that you need to comply with this policy and the local laws. I don't think that answer is very, very straightforward. I don't think that solution is very straightforward, but for a global organization, complying with each and every country's laws is a challenge, will remain a challenge, and it's not simple. But that's how companies are dealing with it globally.
Yeah, and if I can quickly sum it up, see, and I'll be very honest with you, if I look from a US multinational perspective, US FCPA is the benchmark, and then obviously it then boils down to subsidiaries across the globe. While we build our anti-corruption program and policies, US FCPA is there in the mind, but when it comes to India, we also look at Prevention of Corruption Act. So that's how we need to create that fine balance. So you would say that we kind of have a hybrid approach. While we follow those global policies which apply to everyone across the board, we do have these specific country level nuances, so which needs to be also kept into mind.
Can I add on
Thank you.
Let me add to this. Under the UNCAC resolution, United Nations Convention Against Crime and Corruption, whether it is the Foreign Bribery Act in the UK or US or India's Prevention of Corruption Act, the benchmarking cannot be different as far as compliances are concerned. To answer your question, what they do is, as far as acceptance is concerned, there they are using the mechanism to make it look as if there is a difference in the standards in relation to the local laws. But basically underlying principles and the benchmark remains the same. Bribe giving, bribe taking. Violation of compliances, adherence to compliances. They remain static, they remain at even keel. That's the bottom line.
Thank you so much. Absolutely agree. You guys have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so very much. And thank you to my esteemed panelists for such an interesting, insightful, and of course, back and forth with some of the members. And thank you for the surprise that you gave to our audience today in the middle of our session. So wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, once again. Thank you. Yeah, a loud round of applause for our esteemed panels, please. Thank you.